Velina me ke aloha. Welcome to the Lāhui Rising series. This educational series is designed to create a safe, respectful, and enriching learning space for all audiences to hear and honor various perspectives on matters of Hawaiian interest. The content of the presentation shown in the Lāhui Rising series may not necessarily reflect the views of Kamehameha schools. However, we hope this series will encourage openness and respect for differing views on Hawaiian issues and stimulate discussion and action towards positive change for our Lāhui Hawaii.
Nani that we sing that in the presence of these makamai o nā ali'i, yeah? A e olu olu e ho'omalu kākou, e ko mākou mākui I loko kalani, ka makua mana, ka makua ihi ihi, ka makua aloha. Our great and powerful Heavenly Father, filled with aloha, we mahalo your presence. Nui ko mākou mahalo ia oe kia kua no ka mea nau no I ho a koa ko me nei no mākou. I mua o ma ke ia wahi o ka iwa kilo moku. We thank you for your kindness and compassion in bringing us together on this special day at this place, ka iwa kilo moku, here at Kamehameha Schools for Velo Ha'aheo, an exhibition of Hawaiian royal flags, these mea makamai of our ali'i. We call upon your presence and we thank you for your protection in bringing these flags here safely to this place. And we humbly ask that you also protect them and take them safely back at the conclusion of our time today. We are thankful to be standing, admiring these special makamai, these precious gifts of our ali'i that have been stored for so many, many years. And we thank the partnership of the Hawaii State Archives, Adam Jansen and all the helpers this morning, as well as Kamehameha Schools and others who have brought this together so that we can see with our own eyes the personal standards, sort of the European somewhat equivalent of our kahili for our mo'ikane Kalakaua and his sister Kamo'i Wahine Lili'u o Kalani, Hanai sister of Keli'i Pawahi. Although made of simple cloth, these symbols of ali'i are imbued with the mana of our ali'i, as well as the major historical events that they witnessed in our past. And this mana is with us today. It energizes our strong sense of Hawaiian pride and patriotism. Aloha aina, love for one's homeland and people, is our enduring and steadfast trait in Hawaiian culture. And these steady reminders, these high, of who and whom we come from. Ke Akua, help us to forever hold these high, these flags in our minds and in our na'au. Velo ha'aheo, fluttering proudly. Velo ha'aheo, symbols of a proud and patriotic people. We thank you for the many hands, those working today who we will see tending to what needs to be mended and what needs to be restored. Parallels in some ways to our Lāhui Hawaii, for which we give you thanks. Ke Akua, all these things we lift up to you. We ask forgiveness for our shortcomings, and again, always acknowledge you as the supreme being. Be with us, all of us today. Makaino o kaukeiki hiva hiva o Yesu Christo. Amen.
Me ke haulohi o ka maukele. Kohu akali ko lau niho niho. Me ke kaia nia o hamoa. Ko heki kamae hui ke kapeka. Peresia o ni o uri uri. Kuripu iwa I ke oho o waho, o lili'u o kalani e o lamau. Ko hae ka launu velo ha'aheo, I ka ni o ka upoku o I o lani hale. Ha'ina powehi e ku'ulani, o lili'u ke kuini o Mai kai kina o ka lā I kumukahi, ai ka velona ka lā I lehua, e nā ahahui o nā li'i Royal Order of Kamehameha, a me mama kakaua, e nā kahu vai vai, o ka ho'oilina a luna lilo, a me nā mea hano hano a pauloa I hele mai. E nā kini o ka aina, nā mama a haloa, aloha aina kako a pauloa.
On behalf of the Board of Trustees of Kamehameha Schools and our Chief Executive Officer, Jack Wong, it's my great privilege to welcome you all this morning to the Ka'iwa Kilo Moku Hawaiian Cultural Center for today's extraordinary presentation, Velo Ha'aheo, an exhibition of Hawaiian royal flags. I'm Randy Kamuela Fong, Executive Cultural Officer and Managing Director of Ho'okahua Cultural Vibrancy Group. Today's event is part of a series called Lāhui Rising. Kamehameha Schools is committed to safe spaces where people of all ages can gather to learn about issues important to Hawaiians and express themselves freely in a nurturing environment. Today's presentation is a collaboration organized by Jamie Fong, Ka'iwa Kilo Moku Manager, and Adam Jensen, Director of the Hawaii State Archives. We're deeply honored that Adam and his staff allowed these precious treasures to be removed from the vault and transported here to Kamehameha Schools to be on public display for a day in recognition of Archives Month. We also acknowledge the kindness of Dr. Ron Williams, President of the Hawaiian Historical Society, and Dr. Doug Askman, Associate Professor of History at Hawaii Pacific University, for the knowledge they will share in their presentations today. This rare exhibition is both emotional and sobering. We recall the dynamic days of the kingdom when these standards were waving proudly above Iolani Palace in full glory. And we grieve the shameful day they were lowered, yielding to an unholy agenda of greed. Those dark moments will be relived in a hula you will see shortly that describe tears streaming down the face of the Hawaiian nation. Today, well over a century after the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom, we draw strength and inspiration from these brilliant banners of Hawaiian identity and Kanaka sovereignty. They empower us to envision a future when such emblems of political governance and Lāhui pride may once again rise high and wave with grace and dignity for all the world to see. At this time, please help me welcome Hawaii State Archives Director, Adam Jensen, to share a few words. Adam?
Aloha mai kaiko. I am humbled to be speaking to such an august group and before the Royal Societies and before such amazing majesty and history that we have before us today. I have the honor of being the State Archivist of Hawaii and leading an amazing team of dedicated staff that is really striving to ensure that the history that we see before us continues to endure for generations to come. Now, October is American Archives Month, an initiative that was started in 2006 by the Society of American Archivists and supported by the Council of State Archives. It is meant to be a time to focus on the importance of records of enduring value in a society that is increasingly demanding accountability and transparency in government. Archives protect your rights, your property, your identity, and your history. This group of professionals that you will see working around here are the guardians of these records and the voices of the past that are contained within those records. They are dedicated to providing for the physical and moral defense of those records against all disasters, natural and man-made, to serve all researchers equally, whether they're red or blue, right, left, or center. Our only duty is to protect the records. Our only duty is to the voices of the past to the benefit of the future. They believe so passionately in this mission that they have given up their Saturday to preserve this history. We had over 30 volunteers offer to give up that Saturday. Professional archivists that don't work for me, that gave up their Saturday. For Archives Month this year, we have chosen to focus on the largest items in our collection and easily amongst the most important historical cultural items at the Hawaii State Archives. As these Hawaiian Kingdom Royal Standards are not on public display for many, many decades, they have well overdue for inspection and conservation. Now, we could have done this in the research room at the State Archives, but these pieces are much larger than that, both physically and, more importantly, metaphorically. For what the State Archives holds, it holds in the public trust for the good of all, for researchers today and, more importantly, for the generations to come. So we wanted to share the conservation efforts that we are going to be doing here today with the public so that they could share in the majesty and the history and partake in that cultural heritage. We have to say a big, big mahalo to Kamehameha Schools for this. Like wayward children, we approached Kamehameha Schools with a ridiculous set of conditions. We needed a large space we couldn't pay for. We couldn't sign an indemnity clause. And the event was 2 months away. In less than a week, they not only said yes, they completely adopted us, and they made us feel as part of the family. For this, I am deeply indebted to Jamie Fong and the Kamehameha Schools for being most gracious hosts and co-sponsoring this event. And so because of their, thank you, please. We could not literally have done this without them. So because of their generosity, among the treasures we have to share with you today are 2 banners from King Kalakaua Jubilee, one for Queen Kapiolani's Hula Society and one for Princess Liliuokalani's Educational Society. We have not 1, not 2, but 3 royal standards of the Hawaiian Kingdom to share with you. And when I mentioned that we focused on the largest items out of the State Archives collection, I meant large. And that distinction belongs to the royal standard that King Kalakaua took with him on his 1881 progress around the world. And that piece weighs in at 20 feet by 30 feet, easily dwarfing anything else that we have at the State Archives. And finally, from one of the darkest chapters in Hawaiian history, we have the personal royal standard of Queen Liliuokalani that was lowered from Iolani Palace in 1893. And yet, even this story has an amazing twist of fate. For the grandson of Captain Good, who oversaw the overthrow, the grandson donated the standard to West Point Museum when he became a cadet at West Point. And as he became an older man, he understood, and he approached West Point Museum and realized that the standard belonged to the people. And he negotiated with West Point Museum to have it returned to the people of Hawaii. And not only that, but as a gesture of goodwill, and some would say contrition, he had Captain Good's sword returned with the standard. So in closing, if you will please indulge me as I return to my archivist core, and those of you who know me, I am very passionate about archives. I would advocate on behalf of your local archives, please go and see what records they have to offer for you. Fake news is nothing new. As long as people have had an agenda and have been writing things down, they have been writing half-truths and fake news. Just because someone has told you it's true does not make it so. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. Question everything. Come to the archives. See for yourself the original writings that witnesses wrote onto the paper. Read the words that they laid onto that paper. Feel the meaning, that they imbued into that. And only then will you learn the truth. Thank you.
invite you to stand and sing Nele Aipo Haku Kaudana Nā Pua to bring our time together this morning to a close and to begin our public exhibition. Kaulana. Kaulana Nā Pua o Hawaii, Kupa'a maho peo ka'aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Kalapala anu ke ka maka. Hane mai Hawaii, Hane mai Hawaii I moku o ke ave, O kuana honoa o Pilani, Kako o mai kaua I o mano, Kaupu me ke oio ka puhi hewa. Aole a e kau I ka pulima, Maruna o ka pekao ka ememi, O hui aina ku ai hewa, I ka pono sihira o ke kanaka. Aole mātou. Aole mātou ale mina mina, I ka kukala o ke aupuni, Malapa mātou I ka pohatu, I ka aina maha o ka aina. Mahope mātou o liliulani. Mahope mātou liliulani, Aloha ai ka pono ka aina, Aina ia mai ana ka puana, O ka poe I aloha I ka aina. Mahope hou. Mahope mātou liliulani, Aloha ai ka pono ka aina, Aina ia mai ana ka puana, O ka poe I aloha I ka aina.
Thank you so much. Yes, what an amazing day. What a beautiful day. I was always trained to start with my mo'okuauhau, so if you'll bear with me, I'll do that. My familial mo'okuauhau comes from my mother, who is Janet Marie LaBounty. My mother came from Chicago, where I was born. Her people come back from Paris through Montreal and also Wales, so she's French and Welsh. My father is Ron Williams Sr. He and his family come from Arkansas, where I grew up in the South. He's a hunter, a fisherman, literally lives in the woods in a trailer, and is an amazing aloha aina in Arkansas. So I mahalo my dad for raising me that way. My academic mo'okuauhau, I graduated high school in 1984. I went straight away to BYU Provo, Utah, and was there for 3 semesters, and they asked me to go home. I think I took 6 classes a semester for 3 semesters, and I think I passed one of them. I wasn't ready for college. I was 17. And so I came home, lived life for a while, came out, lived in San Francisco with my then girlfriend, who became my wife, who became my ex-wife. But we came out to Maui in 1996. My beautiful daughter, Ronald Williams, who's here with me today, was born in 1998. I was working at the Feast at Lele, luau in Lahaina. I helped open up that luau and was having a blast, watching the sunset every night, talking to fun strangers, eating pohole fern and moi, and drinking a couple of beers, and making good money. I realized one day at the luau that I couldn't do it forever. As I saw my daughter growing up, that no one wants to see a 60-year-old with his shirt off, so I better get a real job. And so I went to, I really got struck by an amazing fortune, and that was to meet my first kumu, Akoni Akana. Akoni Akana, who ran the Friends of Moku'ula, for some reason took this skinny haole farmer boy under his wing and used to train me to do those cultural history tours that he does of Lahaina. Lahaina was, and the Lahaina Restoration Foundation, the different societies were telling the 200-year history of Lahaina, ever since the missionaries arrived. Akoni wanted to tell the 2,000-year history of Lahaina, and he really did that. So I owe him my start in my interest in fanning that flame. When I came here, I knew that I was in someone else's land. I was malahini to this place, but he really got me going. He taught me, I remember in language he used to teach me, I'm kind of niele, I'm kind of a little bit energetic, and so I used to ask him to teach me language, and he said, I'll give you a word. He gave me a single word every day, and he said, learn that word. Don't play with it, learn that word. He also taught me different things about the places. He used to take us around the backside of Maui. Akoni passed about 10 years ago now, maybe longer. But that spark turned into me going to Maui Community College. My first kumu there was Keopi Raymond. I took Hawaiian Studies 107 from Keopi. Keopi was another influential kumu. Got me passionate about that. Taught me to ho'olohe. He called me after class one day. Class was all 17, 18, 19-year-olds, and then me, this 35-year-old. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I know that, And he said after class one day, he said, Ron, you're so excited to let me know what you know, you're not listening, right? And I hopefully learned a little bit about listening. Keopi taught me that. He taught me many other things, including showing a film one day in class of the most amazing woman I've ever seen. Passionate, fierce, brilliant. And I said, that's who I want to study under, and that was Dr. Haunani K. Trask. I went on a Rainbow Bridge program to UH Manoa. They take the junior college kids over and they bring them to Manoa. And we flew over, we got on a bus, we go over there, and it's all kinds of students. And they drive around the campus and they drop you off at wherever you want to check out. Engineering, math, science, biology, so forth. Hawaiian Studies is the last stop because it's down on Dole Street. And so people are getting off the bus, Second to last stop, everyone else gets off the bus, get 12 Hawaiians and me. And they're like looking at why are you still on the bus? But I knew I wanted to come to Kamakaku. So I was nervous, got off the bus, and had my third kind of fortune, and that was to meet a wonderful woman named Mehana Hind, who works here actually works at OHA today. But Mehana welcomed me. She was our counselor at the time, and she told me, Ron, if you choose to come here to Kamakaku, this is your home too. You're going to eat with us, you're going to sleep with us, you're part of our ohana. And I was treated as ohana there. For some reason I don't really know, Dr. Trask took me under her wing and got me through college. Lots of life issues and things that happened between my undergraduate time and my graduate time. And Dr. Haunani K was always there in many, many ways to guide me and drag me through college. When I was on Maui and with my daughter, when my daughter was 7, and she called me and said, you're coming back to grad school, right? And I said, no, Kumu, I have no money, I'm taking care of my daughter. She said, you're coming back to grad school. She goes, get here and we'll figure it out. And Dr. Trask found me a tuition waiver. She found housing for us, all kinds of things. For this skinny haole farmer boy from Arkansas. So I owe her where I am today. Lili Kalaka Lahiva, John Osorio, all of those folks. I got my bachelor's degree in Hawaiian Studies in 2005. I got my master's degree in Pacific Island Studies in 2008. And I got my PhD in Hawaiian History in 2013. The University of Hawaii finally found it worthy to do a PhD in Hawaiian history. After 100 years of having a PhD in American history and Southeast Asian history and Korean history and so forth, they hired Dr. Noelani Arista and John Rosa about 8 years ago now to start an actual PhD in Hawaiian history. Before you could get a PhD in Pacific history and focus on Hawaii. But so now they've dedicated some energy to that. So I was honored to go through that program and end up where I am today. I taught at the Center for Hawaiian Studies at Kamakaku for 12 years, and I'm here now today to talk to you with some of that ike that my kumu have passed to me. Ellie Grant, said wonderful things about me. I see me as a messenger. Yeah, my time, my work is in the Hawaiian language newspapers, in the Hawaiian language records, and in other archives. These voices come, and all I do is platform them. So that's my role, my small role in bringing this history to you. Nanea Armstrong, who's here today, Lionel Wong, and others have put together an incredible program that's the history of the Hawaiian flag. I recommend that highly. It's on the website of the Cultural Center. So if you go on the Cultural Center website and look, there's a beautiful, about a 45-minute long history of the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. Today what I'm going to talk about is the relationship of the people to the flag. So that's what we'll talk about here, and hopefully kind of give an essence of that when you go and look at the flags today. Okay. So let's get started. Poe Aloha Aina and the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. For any visitors here today, Poe Aloha Aina is translated as patriots, people who love the land, both literally and metaphorically. It's talked about, used quite a bit around the time, throughout the kingdom period, but also especially around the time of the overthrow and after. Those folks who loved the land, loved the nation so much, they sacrificed all kinds of things for the nation. Okay? So, historiography in Hawaii. Anybody who knows me knows when I talk, I always spend a few minutes on historiography. One of the most important topics, I think, in Hawaii today. And that is just a fancy word for the process of the creation of history. How history was created. Historiography in Hawaii is, I have to watch my language here, is a messed up thing here in Hawaii, yeah? What we've ended up with, the story, the narrative about Hawaii and its people, has gone through a 100-year process of exclusion of native voices. And I'm going to show you why and how, and talk to you about the good side that we're kind of undoing that. So, approximately 95% of the published material about the Hawaiian Kingdom and Kanaka Oiwi of the period comes from English language sources. Think about that. 95% of the published material about Hawaii and Hawaiians comes from English language sources only. Now, why is that a problem? It's not that English language sources inherently lie. It's not that Hawaiian language sources inherently tell the truth. But it's that you've got a tiny portion of the population that has written the history of Hawaii. Yeah? Imagine this. I tell this analogy in my class. Imagine if you were going to write a history of America. And so this is 1900. And you want to write a history of America. And so you hire the best historian in the world. Wonderful, wonderful researcher, historian, gentleman. He's Italian. And so he goes to Washington, D.C., to the National Archives, where there's 5 billion documents. And he goes up to the front desk, and he tells the worker there, he doesn't speak English, he speaks Italian. And so he tells the worker there, give me everything you've got written in Italian about America. And she goes back in the back in those 5 billion documents, and she pulls out the 5,000 documents that were written by Italian Americans. And he pulls them out, and he sits down, and he stays up all night, and he writes and writes and writes and writes for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he creates a history of America. And that becomes a pamphlet, that becomes a book, that becomes an after-school special, that becomes a movie, that becomes the history that we all know about America today. That's not the history of America. That's the history of America from Italian Americans, right? That's what's happened here in Hawaii. We know the history of Hawaii and Hawaiians through a small portion of English language writers. That's very problematic. I call it the 6%. Helen Chapin wrote that the English-speaking population at the time of the overthrow was about 6%. That was their first language. So you're talking about 6% of the people. You're talking about missionaries, missionary wives, ship captains, storekeepers, lawyers, visitors, travelers, and others who wrote up 95% of the Hawaiian history. The other 94% of people spoke, and they wrote prolifically. We have 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspaper digitized today. The newspaper project has gotten a lot of attention, rightfully so, but people don't also talk about Hawaiian language letters. tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Hawaiian language letters in the archives. We just did a project this summer. Students of mine did an archival project in the state archives where they digitized the letters of Lucy Peabody, friend of the Queen, Huiloha Aina Wahine, started Ka'ahumano Society again in 1905. Over 300 letters Maka'olelo Hawaii from about Lucy Peabody. Tons of collections like that in the archives that historians haven't accessed to write the history of Hawaii. So again, the 6% has created the history. The illusion of native voice has given us a history about Hawaiians, not from Hawaiians. These are people, kind of a general scope of the population, who wrote about Hawaii. And not just Hawaiians. We have Japanese language newspapers. We have Chinese language newspapers. What were they saying about the overthrow? What were the Japanese saying about the Bayonet Constitution? Yeah? Those are things we have yet to know. Of the people that did produce Hawaiian history, there's three kind of main producers. Obviously there's a lot of people writing, but three kind of things that have often been sourced. So all of this stuff is out there. When a historian today goes and does his or her research, what do they access? Every year there's a new book that comes out. Captive Paradise, this Hawaiian overthrow, this, and so it comes out from New York or Boston or so forth, right? And they proudly proclaim, I spent 6 weeks in Hawaii doing research. There's folks who have been in the archives for 30 years, right? And those people who are turning out that historical material don't speak Hawaiian. So they're accessing, basically, the Pacific Commercial Advertiser, which was the largest English language newspaper of the time. They're accessing people like the Reverend Sereno Bishop, who was a prolific writer of Hawaiian history, who wrote for The Friend, which was the missionary paper, but also wrote for all the newspapers here and in America. And they're coming from people like W.D. Alexander, who was the president of the Board of Education in Hawaii, who wrote prolifically about Hawaiians and who actually turned out a textbook about Hawaiians. Okay? So let me show you a couple of examples about why this is a specific problem. This book, Unconquerable Rebel, about Robert Kanihapo Wilcox. This book was assigned to me in my Pacific Island Studies graduate course as a learning about this Hawaiian hero. It was written by Ernest Andrade. I read it, learned about Robert Wilcox. Well, also at the same time, all my other classes are Maka'olelo Hawaii, and I'm reading the newspapers and I'm hearing a whole different story. And so in Noe Silva's class, who was my mentor and somebody I mahalo also, Dr. Noe Silva's class, she had us do a biography. So I said, I'm going to do Wilcox, because I hear 2 different stories about him. And so I went back and I resourced this book. I actually did an article for Hulili about this, a review of this book. Every review of it done professionally up to that point said prolifically researched. Couldn't have been researched better. Saw thousands of sources. He did. He saw thousands of sources. 90% of them were the Pacific Commercial Advertiser. So he's writing what? So what is the Pacific Commercial Advertiser? Pacific Commercial Advertiser is the foreign language press in Honolulu. Yeah? Remember to take ourselves back to 1890s. Olelo Haole is the norm today. 1872, 1880s, 1890s, the English language press were foreign language presses. Albert Francis Judd, he says it himself. The Pacific Commercial Advertiser is the foreign language newspaper. So what we have here is a biography of Robert Wilcox from the foreign language press who were his enemies, right? And so you see this story about Robert Wilcox accessing that language and so forth. The Hawaiian language newspapers tell a completely different story. Yeah, a completely different story of Robert Wilcox. I argue that today we have very, very few legitimate biographies of some of Hawaii's greatest leaders. Aloha Lani Brown, a colleague of mine, just published a book on John Papa'i'i that I think is one of the first. Prolifically researched in Hawaiian and English language archives. But folks like Robert Wilcox and others, those stories are still to come. My specific master's or PhD doctoral dissertation was on the native Hawaiian churches in Hawaii, the Protestant churches that came out of the 1820 mission to Hawaii. I went into this dissertation set on telling the story of how the Christian church came to Hawaii, brainwashed Hawaiians, and took over their country. I found a whole 180-degree different story. When I started to read the Hawaiian language newspapers, the Hawaiian language articles, the things from the actual congregants in the churches, what I found was that they took that church, claimed it, made it their own, and used the Christian church as the center point of their fight for the nation and for the Queen. The day after the overthrow in 1893, Kaumakapili, Waiola Church in Lahaina, and others start prayer fast meetings praying for the restoration of their queen against their administration in Honolulu, who had been pushing for the overthrow. So what you have is, after 1863, when Boston pulled away, you have 40, 50,000 Native Hawaiian Christians in their churches, and you have a board of 8 white men in Honolulu, the administrative board. That wasn't the organization. The people were. So I started to go back, look at those documents, and I find out every single history or story of the mission in Hawaii today is written from the annual reports that went back to Boston, from the, quote, Hawaiian Evangelical Association. It wasn't the Hawaiian Evangelical Association. In their constitution in 1863, they declare, we are the Ahahui Wanaleo o Hawaii. Our language is Hawaiian. They mandate that all the meetings be held in Hawaiian. Every baptism, everything going on in the church is happening in Hawaiian. They say we're creating English language reports to send to our bosses back in Boston. Those reports were what everyone has used to write the history of the Christian church in Hawaii. The Hawaiian language reports are different in content and context. They tell a much different story. There's also a collection of pastors' letters that are in the Bishop Museum that were closed until 2006. They're the Judd collection. There was a restriction put on the collection saying that nobody could look at it until the last grandchild passed away, Henry Jetty III, Albert Francis Jetty III. DeSoto Brown used to tease me when I went in there. He said, no, you can't look at it. Can't look at it. I went in one day. He's got a macabre sense of humor. I went in one day. He said, the guy died. So no, rest his soul. But the collection came open. There's about 3,000 letters, Makolala Hawaii, from the pastors of the churches to Albert Francis Judd, who was the Papa Hawaii. He was the head of the board in Honolulu. So they tell you exactly what was going on in the churches. That accessing that material tells us a new history. One final example, this book. And there's going to be a few things today. I want to start off by saying, or jump in and say that some of the stuff I talk about today is, in my mana'o, has this kaumaha, yeah? It's difficult for me. I can only imagine how it is for others. But all of the stuff that I'm going to show you, I've talked to the families about, and they encourage me to show. And people that I know, that I've talked to in other talks, have said, we need to know this information. I don't say it to get you angry. The person who wrote this book died 150 years ago. I say it hopefully to have us all understand how we know about what we know today from people like this, and what we can do about it. Hopefully it inspires us to look at things we see with caution. This book, this is an actually original copy. This was from W.D. Alexander, the gentleman I talked about earlier. He wrote a pamphlet a few weeks after the overthrow called The Glory of the Revolution, talking about the overthrow. In 1889, he published that pamphlet as a book called A Brief History of the Hawaiian People. He was the president of the Board of Education at the time. The book is an awful, racist, horrible book. It talks about how Hawaiians aren't fit to rule, how they're not even human, and so forth. If you think about what happened, the gentleman who had pushed the overthrow had been begging the U.S. to annex them since 1893, and it wasn't happening. All of a sudden, in 1898, the annexation supposedly happens. They have a party at Iolani Palace, literally a ball at Iolani Palace that runs till 4 in the morning. I like to think they woke up and said, oh, crap, what do we do? Because they brought democracy to Hawaii for the first time in 5 years. Yeah? A form of democracy, right? In the territory, the governor was appointed by the President of the United States. The judges are appointed by the governor. But the legislature is elected, and everybody has a vote. Hawaiians have a vote now. So they massively outnumbered the Haole in Hawaii, and they elected Home Rule Party members to that first territorial legislature. So the people have to make, Judd guys and the other folks, Thurston and so forth, prior to the annexation, have to make an argument why they're taking over a country and they're a minority. So they're going to use that race argument. Now understand, they're talking about a nation that was one of the most progressive modern nations in the world through the 19th century. A couple of facts. 1840, the mo'i, an absolute ruler, divine ruler, gives up 2/3 of his power to create a constitution that's going to gain recognition, that's going to save the nation for 50 years. An absolute ruler, as a historian, I don't know another example of that in the world, where an absolute ruler said, I'll take the executive branch, we're going to create 2 other branches of government so that we can gain recognition from the other nations of the world. And they did. The first non-European nation to gain recognition was the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1843. 1852, the Constitution of Hawaii offered universal manhood suffrage. Chinese, Japanese, African Americans, Africans, people could come to Hawaii, be a citizen of the country, a subject of the country, own property, and vote. That's a decade prior to the Civil War in America. In the 1860s, Americans were fighting a war over whether or not to own black people. And in Hawaii, black people could own property, could vote, and became citizens. That's how progressive the kingdom was under native rule. 1881, Kalakaua travels around the world as the first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. Electricity, Iolani Palace. Again and again and again, inventions, modernity, all of these things were happening in the Kingdom of Hawaii under native rule. Yeah. So you got to wipe that out. You got to say in 1898, well, they're not human. Well, how are they not human if they've been running this country? So you create a new narrative. And that narrative is contained in this book. And I want to read you one particularly egregious part. The topic of infanticide was a kind of a rumor among many people back at the time. Dr. David Stannard has written a book debunking infanticide in Hawaii. Nonetheless, in 1898, W.D. Alexander wrote this about infanticide in Hawaii. Infanticide was fearfully prevalent, and there were a few of the older women at the date of the abolition of idolatry who had not been guilty of it. It was the opinion of those best informed that 2/3 of all the children born in Hawaii were destroyed in infancy by their parents. They were generally buried alive, in many cases, in the very houses occupied by their unnatural parents. The principal reason given for it was laziness, unwillingness to take the trouble of rearing children. So William DeWitt Alexander, the president of the Board of Education, writes that 2/3 of Native Hawaiian children were buried alive in their front yards by their parents because they were too lazy to raise kids. That's disgusting, and we know it's not true. Yet, and the reason why I'm talking about it, besides, again, I'm not trying to get you to hate him. The reason I'm talking about it is because it's important. This pamphlet, this book, became the school textbook for all public and private schools in Hawaii for 40 years. This book, in the territory of Hawaii from 1899 to 1940, was the school textbook for history. So your kapuna read this about their ancestors. That's why it's important. That's historiography. That's creating an understanding about Hawaiians for the rest of the world and Hawaii. This was the school textbook at Stanford University, at Leland Stanford University in 1899. Yes, ma'am.
Has that been reprinted and updated so it can be purchased by any chance?
Yes, and it is, and it's available online, Google Books. Google Books, yeah. But so again, understanding why in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s to be Hawaiian was what? Was a little bit lazy, not so smart, da-da-da-da. I was living in Pololo with an auntie that I was housing with. Kiele and I lived, kalamai, broke grad student dad. We were living in Pololo. We were renting a room from Auntie Mrs. Nobriga, Charlene Nobriga. And she thought her parents spoke fluent Hawaiian. She didn't speak a word. Half Portuguese, half Hawaiian. She said, when I was growing up, no, you leave that Hawaiian behind. She got a real tickle out of the fact this haole boy in her house was learning Hawaiian stuff. So every night we'd talk about what I learned. So I invited her down to Kamakaku one time for my friend's graduation, Kimo Armitage. He got his PhD in English literature. And so I said, Auntie, come, my friend's graduating. So she came down, we had luau, we had a celebration. She met Kimo. Kimo's kind of fair-skinned, like a little, maybe even lighter than myself. And we're talking later, and I said, Auntie, did you say hi to Kimo? She said, oh, yeah. She goes, oh, smart that haole boy. I said, no, Auntie, he's Hawaiian. Hawaiian? Get a PhD. And she wasn't joking. I mean, to her, she couldn't fathom the idea that a Hawaiian had a PhD, right? So outside of academia, right, what are these things that are still thought about Hawaiians and so forth? It comes from that type of material put out by W.D. Alexander. So all these people writing history, all these people talking about history, yet the history was created, kalamai. This is where we get historical voice, right? The 6%. That's what we know about Hawaii. So, po'eloha aina o kohova ipai aina. So the people of the land who loved their nation, who loved their flag. Yeah? That's what I want to talk about now, is that flag and what it meant to them. I'm only going to spend a moment on the idea of these other flags and so forth, the Rasta flag and the green and yellow and da-da-da. I don't have a problem with it as a political thing. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a historian. If that flag inspires you as a person, that's great. It doesn't have history. That wasn't the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. When people talk about the fact that, I don't know, this flag looks British to me. It looks like a colonial imposition and so forth. That's not what your kupuna thought. They adored this flag. They died for this flag. They sang about this flag. Kalama. That flag was their national flag. Yeah? I want to ask you to do me a favor to help me out with this. I want you to raise your hand high if you know of the man named Abraham Lincoln. Okay? Raise your hand high if you know of George Washington. Okay? Raise your hand high if you know of Ulysses Grant. Okay? Raise your hand high if you know of the man William Punaho Aveoveo Ulukalani White. Okay, about 10 of us. Raise your hand high if you know of Frederick Kahopula Beckley Jr. About 12, 15. Raise your hand high if you know of Abigail Ku'ailani Campbell. More, about 20. Raise your hand high if you know of William Henry Daniels. About 4 or 5. Raise your hand high if you know of Kalua Palawa Kama. 1, okay? These folks were the heroes, were the patriots of the Hawaiian Kingdom. A few of the hundreds and hundreds. When Noenoe Silva wrote her book and talked about resistance to the overthrow, talked about people stepping up and giving up their jobs, all kinds of things, she touched the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds and hundreds, if not, there are thousands of native Hawaiian heroes that most of us don't know about, right? I would argue that this is a really educated crowd, right? What if we were doing this out in the community, right? What are the kids learning at school? Are they learning about Kalua Palawa Kama, William Henry Daniels, and these folks? I'll give you 5 seconds on each one. William Punaho Aveoveo Ulukalani White was one of the Queen's right-hand man. He was a senator from Lahaina. He's the gentleman, along with Joseph Navahi and Sam Nolan, who wrote her new constitution that she was proposing. He was Knight's Order of Kalakaua on January 14th, 1893. He was the last awarded at the palace. The morning before the Queen was going to proclaim her new constitution, she awarded William White the Knight's Order of Kalakaua for his work on the Constitution. William White was part of Halinau'a, a dedicated Po'eloha Aina. About 10 years ago, the family got together and started a project to honor him, but up until that point, I had never met a historian who'd ever heard of him. Frederick Beckley Jr., we're honoring tonight at the Hawaiian Historical Society, proponent of Hawaiian language until the day he died, teacher at Kamehameha Schools, he was the first Hawaiian language professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, senator from Molokai. When the territorial legislature starts in 1901, the Organic Acts had prohibited Hawaiian language as being used in the legislature, which was a problem because about 8 or 10 of the home rule electors didn't speak English. So they were speaking Hawaiian in the legislature. Governor Dole sent his assistant governor, Cooper, down to make sure no one spoke Hawaiian in the legislature. Frederick Beckley had him kicked out of the legislature, right? Beckley fought and fought and fought, demanded for a place for Hawaiian language. Abigail Ku'ailani Campbell, many of us know as benefactor, as an incredible supporter of the Queen. William Henry Daniels is a gentleman I'll talk about later in my presentation. Judge from Wailuku, Maui, one of the most foremost Hawaiian judges. Kalua Palawa Kama was a woman from Lāhui who helped organize and found the Home Rule Party. Democrats, Republicans, the women weren't allowed to be part of that constitutional makeup, but also didn't generally come to the rallies and so forth. Hawaiian Home Rule Party had 3 women on their board to found the party, and she was one of them. She defied her church. She was from Lāhui. She defied her church. She defied her government to help form the Home Rule Party. When Wilcox won that election to become the representative to the United States, the first thing they do, Wilcox and the Queen, is go out to Lāhui and have luau with Kalua Palawa Kama. So some of the heroes of Hawaiian history. And I'll show you, so I mentioned William White. There's the photographs just to give you a chance. Abigail Campbell, Frederick Kahopula Beckley, Kalua Palawa Kama, I don't have a photograph of her, and William Henry Daniels. I want to mention something else, just these little vignettes for me mean a lot. Mrs. Campbell was hapai at the time of the overthrow. She gave birth in March of 1893. This is her child here. Does anybody in the room know what she named her child? She named her child Royalist Campbell. Literally Royalist Campbell, in honor of the Queen. Her child died at 4 years old, or 3 years old in 1896. I visited the cemetery recently. And there's, Royalist Campbell. Those people loved their nation. Those people loved their land. They fought, breathed, and died for that flag, for that nation. So, ke aloha o na maka'ainana no ke kahai Hawaii, people loving the flag. The last high Hawaii flying over a government building on Oahu struck from the flagpole at military headquarters at 12 p.m. on 12 August 1898, Hawaii State Archives. This is one of the flags that they're working on. I don't think he has this one here today, but this is one of the flags they're working on in this process. This was the last flag flying at 12 o'clock noon over the Hawaiian Kingdom government. 12 o'clock noon, at the proclamation of the annexation, this was brought down over military headquarters. So let's look at some of the instances of the flags, some of the uses of the flags and so forth. Ku'uhai Hawaii, yeah, my beloved flag. We know of the flag quilts. Women made quilts that had the flag incorporated, and they called it Ku'uhai Hawaii, my beloved Hawaiian flag. This newspaper, as many of you know, January 1st, 1862, is the first use of a color flag in a newspaper anywhere in the world. 1862, Kanu Pepo Kuokoa printed this flag in honor of their mo'i, in honor of their nation. This was 30 years before color was used in a newspaper in the United States. It's about 5 years after the first use of color anywhere, which was in England. But a color flag of Hawaii, and they say, the aloha of the people, these are my translations, the aloha of the people for the flag of their country is unending, and when they see it waving, their na'au are filled with joy. Now, a dear friend of mine, texted me this last night and donated for us a copy for everybody. So I'm going to pass these out. Kau Isai has provided these. These are her reproductions of that actual newspaper. This gives you a feeling of what the people were doing, of what they were thinking about, of how they felt about this. This is 1862, right? Long before the overthrow. Another part of it, so they print, on there you'll see about a 40-line mele, a mele Lāhui, a national song about specifically the flag. And they say, "It is you, O fluttering flag, the glorious flower of Hawaii. The steadfast nation of Hawaii, we rejoice, rejoice forever. We, Hawaii, will persevere. The everlasting glory of your name, the Hawaiian flag, the archipelago of Kamehameha Eha." Yeah? The Hawaiian flag, the Hawaiian flag. This is how they felt about their nation. There was a newspaper called Kahai Hawaii, 1856 to 1861. So a newspaper named after the flag. This was run by the Department of Education. Another newspaper in 1913 called Ku'uhai Hawaii. This was run by Apukai Akina. He was the first Speaker of the House of the Territorial Legislature. Put out a newspaper in 1913 called Ku'uhai Hawaii. Another article, Kumaha'olua Ole. This past Monday, the flagpole, so this is June 28, 1893. So about 6 months after the overthrow. This past Monday, the flagpole of Mr. and Mrs. Kamakaya was raised through the nifty work of Sam Koloa, and it stands in distinguished honor. There are 30 flagpoles remaining that have the honor of being made and put up by our friend that are waiting for the day that the wondrous song will be sung, Hawaii Pono'i, Nana I Komo'i. And the famous words are proclaimed, Ua mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono. Kahai nani o Hawaii e mau ko velo ana. And at the conclusion, the voices of thousands of true Hawaiians will call out, "Long live the Queen." This was them waiting for the restoration of the Queen, waiting for a restoration of their nation, and to see their flag flying once again over the palace. Sacrifices for flag and nation. As I mentioned, Dr. Nonoi Silva has done amazing work in showing us how Hawaiians stood up. Most of us, I would guess most of us here, have heard the story of the Royal Hawaiian Band and how they refused to take the oath of allegiance to the provisional government and therefore gave up their jobs. And I tell my kids in class, this wasn't like quitting Walmart and you go work for Target, right? This was your livelihood. This was how you fed your families. A government job was an excellent job in the Kingdom of Hawaii and afterwards. Yet they don't even hesitate, and they lose their jobs. They lose their livelihoods rather than sign the oath of allegiance. Well, that happened by many, many people in many, many professions. People gave up more than just their jobs also. So we'll talk about that for a second. This was a letter in the State Archives I found from William Haskins Kealaka'i Jr., policeman. He writes to Sam Nolan, who was the Queen's kind of bodyguard at the time. January 11th, 1894, so about a year after the overthrow. This is a list of 26 Honolulu police officers, Native Hawaiian police officers, who refused to sign the Oath of Allegiance and therefore give up their livelihoods. 26 Honolulu police officers. Yeah. Kinaiahi, firemen. On Lākuakoa, on November 28, 1893, 11 Kanaka Iwi firefighters resigned their positions with the Fire Department of Honolulu in protest of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. The Hawaiian language newspaper Lāhui says they resigned with honor. They have a true love of your motherland, and they thank them for doing this. So you have policemen, you have firemen walking away from their careers rather than simply signing an oath. Yeah? That shows you their aloha for their flag, for their nation. Some other examples. Kumukula, school teachers, Kauko Olelo, people that worked in the government, secretaries, transcribers, Kahuna Pule, pastors. Yeah? Pastors now, in the 1870s, 1880s, the board in Honolulu quit paying pastors' salaries. And they said, in these Native Hawaiian churches, they said, you can get your money from your parish, right? Get offerings. Problem was, the parishes were shrinking because people were dying. Parishes were shrinking because that specific church, the Calvinist church, was losing members to the Anglicans, the Catholics, the Mormons, and so forth because their officers were pushing the Bayonet Constitution and other things. So the parishes are getting smaller and smaller, yet they're required to live off the parishes. So they started to perform marriages, right? They would get paid to perform marriages, which was an extra income. But that made them government employees. So they were required to sign the Oath of Allegiance to continue to perform marriages. And many pastors refused. Yeah? And so they lost that ability. Letter to Judd here, April 1893, June 9th, 1895. The Lahaina police force was kind of picked on in particular. The Big Island in Hilo, the sheriffs and the attorney general are writing back and forth saying, anyone who you know has signed the roll of the Huiloha Aina, just dismiss them from their jobs. So this wasn't just the Royal Hawaiian Band, this was a national movement to figure out ways to protest. Right? 1895, the Kawaku Local, the Civil War in Hawaii that was led by Robert Wilcox and others. We have this attempt to bring the Queen back after 2 years of being stymied. This is the actual court-martial of the Queen here. The Queen was sentenced to 5 years imprisoned at hard labor and $15,000 fine. Gentlemen including Robert Wilcox, were sentenced to be hung by the neck until dead. We know that the Queen saved those gentlemen by signing an abdication of the throne, which, just as a historical aside, some of my students always go, oh, well, that's where the sovereignty passed from the Hawaiian Kingdom. No, the Queen couldn't have passed sovereignty if she had wanted to. The Queen was the executive of the government. Sovereignty takes the executive and legislative, right? They have to sign a treaty, right? The Queen was simply abdicating the throne, which meant that the next person in line would become the new Queen. Ka'iulani would become the new Queen, right? And any lawyer in the world would tell you that abdication was signed under duress. They told her, if you do not sign, Robert Wilcox and these others will die. So under duress, she signed an abdication of the throne. If you pretend like it's legal, what it meant was she was stepping down from the throne, the next person would succeed her. Yeah, so it's got nothing to do with sovereignty. But this Kuau Kuloko happens. 321 plus men arrested on various charges as POWs and Pioklai Aina. I'm working on a project right now to document all of them. There's lots of different sources. Some people have worked on things before. There's that book. There's lists in the Hawaiian Judiciary Center. I'm doing a project for the Hawaiian Judiciary Center recently, and I got to go into their archives and vaults. And so we're pulling together every source we can find for the folks who were arrested. People who were arrested in battle with guns and stuff like that were considered POWs. But the provisional government, in their records, the Republic, in their records, also say, let's go out around the islands and round up the top Hawaiian leaders and arrest them, because they have information. So they're arresting top Hawaiians from around the islands, bringing them to Oahu and sending them to prison. Now this prison was the same prison that Iosepa Kaho'oluhi Navahio Kalaniupu'u was arrested about 3 months earlier and brought to, where he contracted tuberculosis and later died. It was a disease-filled prison. It was an awful place to be. 321 men and boys arrested and brought to prison. In the course of doing that project for the Hawaiian Judiciary, I came across an incredible find, and that was they have the mugshot book of these gentlemen who were arrested. I spent a long time wondering whether or not to actually bring it, show it, and so forth. I talked with several of the families, and they said, we want to see these, we want the people to know. And so I'm going to share with you today some of those mugshots. And I ask you, I'm just going to do it with a little accompaniment. It's about 4 minutes long, if you'll bear with me. But I want you to think about these husbands, these sons, these fathers, these grandfathers who were rounded up and brought to prison, who spent time in prison in 1895, and who ended up giving up much more than just their jobs. I've read the letters that they wrote from prison, the letters they wrote to their wives saying, how are you feeding the kids? The women organized meetings and protests where they would dress up as prisoners, bring high Hawaii, and go to the prison and stand outside the prison walls while their husbands and gentlemen were in prison. So to honor them and to honor their sacrifice, I want to share their mugshots with you. It'll take about 4 minutes, and then we'll get back to the meat of the presentation. No, sir. Only a few. There were some removed, and the book actually says political prisoners, and they're empty. So there's, I would say, I've got right here, I've got about 90. There's about 30 with me today, but there's 300 and something. Yeah. But we showed this at Makua Valley with Lynette Cruz and others, and many of the kupuna were families of those gentlemen. Okay. One of the most arresting photographs for me was a young boy named Kalua. I wasn't able to bring his photograph this morning, but he's 14 years old. He's 14 years old. He was imprisoned for supporting his queen. And his eyes, you just look at his eyes, you wonder what his mom was thinking, so forth. I want to share with you one story of a prisoner in particular, back in our PowerPoint. And then we're getting towards the conclusion, I promise. So, one of the prisoners in prison there was a man named William Henry Daniels. William Henry Daniels was another Po'eloha'aina, born on 2nd of June, 1855 in Waikapu, Maui. Son of Nancy Hana Kamai Kalani Kopp. She was the first cousin to Lili'u Kalani, daughter of Ha'ole, and Henry William Daniels, a naturalized Hawaiian Kingdom subject. John Dominus Holt's family comes back through here, the Kopp family. He was one of the most prominent jurists or judges in the kingdom. He was the circuit court judge for Wailuku. Revered by both foreign and natives of the areas. He was a lawyer, a coffee planter. He was the owner of W.H. Daniels and Company. He was the owner of Hawaiian Fruit and Taro Company. For a while, he owned a third of Kaho'olawe. Very respected businessman, brilliant judge, and beloved by the people of the entire community. Well, in 1894, he refuses to sign the oath of allegiance to the Republic, and they take him off the bench. There were protests sent in from both Haole and native citizens, native subjects, saying bring him back, and the government refused. He's married, has 10 children. Because he's removed from the bench, he starts to lose his business. His fruit and taro company goes out of business. He loses some of his property, but he continues to do what he thinks is right, and that's support his nation, to support his queen and his flag. Here's his family. The Daniels family of Maui, offspring of Judge H.W. Daniels. His father was H.W. Daniels, and Nancy Kopp. Emma, grandmother of John Dominus Holt, far right, sitting first row. That's Emma. 1894, he was removed from the bench for refusal to sign the oath of allegiance to the provisional government, an outcry from Kanaka Oiwi petitions from both Oiwi and foreigners. Here's a spy report. Now, the Hawaii State Archives has a collection that I call the spy reports. They call them special police reports. The Republic was paying $900 a month to specialists to find out what the Hawaiians were up to, find out what the Queen was up to. Because there was constant rumor that they were going to bring the Queen back. They were paying Haole and Hawaiians to give them information about Huiloha'aina and what was going on. Those spy reports are at the State Archives. You can access those. One of them in particular is this one that I pulled from October 13th, 1894. And in it, it says, on Maui, Daniels, William Henry Daniels, Billy White, William White, and Lelekane are the leaders. Daniels has been shipping rifles to Honolulu made up in long bundles of straw, which he has sent from Kona for the purpose. One of the other interesting aspects of this that we haven't researched too much yet is the role of Japanese. Daniels was sending guns from Oahu over to Maui hidden in straw, and they were being stored on the plantations because the government didn't think to look there. The Japanese, the Chinese, others were infuriated by the 1887 Constitution, which removed the vote for them. Right? 1852, universal manhood suffrage. Everybody got to vote. 1887, made that Constitution, specifically took the franchise away from, quote, Asians. So they couldn't vote anymore. They've been voting, owning property, running things for a long time. Now they couldn't vote. So what was the role of the Japanese and Chinese in supporting the Queen and supporting the return? So here we see that Daniels is bringing guns over. Former Judge Daniels loses all of his businesses and properties, files for bankruptcy. 1895, he's arrested in the Wilcox Rebellion while on Maui fishing. He's picked up, brought to prison. While in prison, he writes 2 letters to his wife that I pulled that asked how he was scared for his family. How are you feeding the kids? How are you getting by? Very nervous in his writings. He spends about 3 months in prison, and then they release him, but he's blackballed. He can't get a job. He's gone bankrupt. He moves his family out to Huelo on the east side of Maui. I'm following him further, Po'eloha'aina. After he gets a menial job on the water ditch, the Spreckles water ditch, and he's doing that. Again, 10 kids. April 27th, 1897, He goes to work, works the day, picks up his paycheck in cash, goes to the field and hands out all of his money to his fellow workers. Goes home to Huelo, pushes his son out of the bedroom, closes the door, and puts a gun in his mouth and kills himself. He committed suicide. Daniels was written about in Kealoha Aina, in the Royalist newspaper, about his sacrifice for the kingdom. When we talk about giving up your job, when we talk about losing your livelihood, there were Hawaiians that also lost much more. Judge Henry Daniels was referred to by the English language paper as Mr. Daniels was formerly police justice in Wailuku and one of the most prominent and brightest Hawaiians on Maui. He has been a staunch royalist, and in him, that party here lose their foremost leader. He was well known all over the islands, and many friends will mourn his death. Mr. Daniels leaves a wife and 9 children. So when we talk about issues that folks are studying now about intergenerational trauma, why that carries on in Kanaka Oiwi today. These are stories we haven't heard. These are stories that we're uncovering that start to explain it in a very dramatic, face-fronted way. Daniels, now I'm going to talk about the happy part in a moment. Many of these projects have spurred the community to take on that kuleana to right these wrongs. So kapo eloha aina o kahai Hawaii in Hawaii today. So what does the flag mean today? I'm going to show you a few of my po eloha aina, my heroes. There's thousands out there today that are working today. You all have many of your own. These are the folks that I think of in that way. Terry Kanalu Young was my professor at Kamakaku. Kumu Kanalu was on my thesis committee for my master's and passed away about a month after the thesis. He dragged me through that thesis. I used to go to his house. If you knew Kanalu, he was quadriplegic. I went to his house and sat by his bed, and he helped me turn it out. You're not leaving until you finish another chapter. But Kumu Kanalu also taught me something amazing, and that was, with all due respect, he was one of the few at the time that I knew that was saying, Ron, we need to tell the truth. Not the best story, not the story we want to hear, not the story that makes the best show. The truth is good enough. Let's tell the truth. He was telling me that 15 years ago. So Kanalu I owe that to. He was Po Eloha Aina. Tama Kaleleiki, who's not here today, but who came with these ladies, or works with these ladies at the church. Tama is the head of Nakia Io Waine'e, the Guardians of Waine'e Church. He has for 20 or 30 years gone every Saturday, malama those tombs with these ladies and others at the church. Still does, through sickness, and health. We honored him at the Hawaiian Historical Society earlier this year. But Tama has been an inspiration for me. Tama gave me my name, also inspires me every time something gets difficult. So he is Po Eloha Aina to me. Lynette Cruz. I watch Kumu Cruz. I call her Kumu Cruz. On Facebook every day she's somewhere. She's either, in the morning, we did this in Makua Valley. The night, we did this in Waianae. I'm like, Anthony, you got a magic carpet. She's somewhere every day fighting for the people, fighting for the land, restoring things, mowing lawns, things like that. So Kumu Cruz is Po Eloha Aina to me. Talbot Pele Iholani George. I mentioned earlier William Ponohu White. When I started researching him 15 years ago, I didn't know another historian who'd ever heard of him. Pele Iholani George, I met at a talk I did at the Judiciary Center. I gave a talk on Navahi. He thanked me for that and said, what about William White? I'm like, you know William White? He said, yeah, I'm his great-grandson. Talbot spurred myself and others to start a project to get William White known. When I asked him one day to show me, he said, what do you want to know? I used to bring him information, bring him documents. He said, what do you want to know? I said, I want to know where he's buried. He said, I'll take you there next Saturday. I hadn't been able to find his grave. I've been searching for years. He drove me. We went up to, his wife was buried at Ka'ahumanu Cemetery. We drove up to School Street. We turned, we parked. I'm like, he's not here. I've checked, And he walks me up, and he walks over, and he says he's right there. And to be bluntly honest, I don't know if I believed him. I thought, Uncle's got a story, Oh, thank you, Uncle. Da, 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 da. I checked with the ladies from Ka'ahumanu Society, and they pulled out the old original map, and that's where he's buried. He was in an unmarked grave. Yeah, one of the greatest heroes of Hawaiian history. Again, one of those men who gave his life, gave his everything to the nation, unmarked grave in Ka'ahumanu Cemetery.
Is it marked now?
It is. Pele Iolani spurred a project that raised $8,000. On his birthday this year, on August 6th, we laid a tombstone for him with his award from the Queen and his Po'elo Hāina status. So there are places that you can take school kids now and things like that. So we owe that to Talbot. Kahu Hanalei Kaliedo, that's a flag. We gave a talk up in Iao Valley for the overthrow a couple of years ago, and the families brought out these flags. Kahu Hanalei is one person that welcomed me into Iao Valley. I see him working every day fighting for the nation. Michael Muhanani K. Trask. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
My grandfather refused to sign the loyalty to the new government, and he paid for the rest of his life as a result of making that decision. Do you have a record of those who refused to sign the loyalty oath?
We don't have a record. We have some records, so they might be in there. There is a list of those who did sign the oath. There's a list of folks who refused to sign the oath, but there's a lot of folks who refused who aren't on that list. But I'd be happy to share with you that list that I have of folks who refused. Okay. Kumu Trask, I owe everything to. Brilliant, one of the most brilliant people I ever met in my life. Again, without getting too personal, got me through school. I was terrified half the time, but she was a student's teacher. Everyone knows the stories of her and the rumors of her. She took this skinny, howly farmer boy from Arkansas and made sure I got a degree. So I owe that to her. Kahokai Kanuha, right? Hi Hawaii, out there today, working and so forth. So these patriots are those people who are doing that work today. We mentioned Daniels. When I gave a talk at KS Maui about 8 months ago, I talked about William Henry Daniels. And somebody said, well, where is he buried? And I said, well, he's up in Iao Valley. So when we went up to Iao Valley, this is before the talk, we went up there and found his grave. He's buried at Iao Community Cemetery, which is where the road dead ends instead of going up in the valley. That cemetery is overgrown, 6-foot grass, can't find anything and so forth. It's a county cemetery. We dug around and found his grave. So when I went to give the talk at Maui, somebody asked me, where's he buried? And I said, he's buried at Iao Community Cemetery, but the grave is overgrown. That gentleman Facebooked me about 3 months later and said, check it out. He went down every Saturday since the talk, cleared the room out, made a border, planted flowers, and it's gorgeous. And William Henry Daniels has a nice, respected place now. But there's hundreds, there's thousands of those types of Po'elo Hāina out there. So, to finish up, we know what the Hawaiian Kingdom flag meant to the Kanaka Uiwi men, women, and children of that nation, right? To the kupuna that watched as their livelihoods, their lands, their nation, and even their lives were taken. We know that they stood courageous and steadfast in their love of nation and their beloved Hai Hawaii. They were challenged. They were challenged in amazing ways. How are you going to feed your family? How are you going to survive? How are you going to exist? And so forth. And they stood up and said, we are for our nation, we are for our flag, we are for our queen. So the question today is, what does the flag mean to us? What does that flag mean to you? Right? What does that flag mean to you? So you've all got your newspapers. What I'm going to do now to finish is ask everyone to stand, and I'm going to ask my friends to lead us in Hawaii Pono'i with the understanding we have now of the flag. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. And if you saw Ron's presentation this morning, he gave you a good background in history. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about royal flags today. So I'm Doug Askman. I'm an associate professor of history at Hawaii Pacific University. And I'm very excited to see, as I'm sure you all are, the wonderful display that we have of historic flags today. And I'm also very happy to have been invited here to give this presentation. So I'm going to be talking about royal standards of the Hawaiian Kingdom and also trying to put some context to it, an international context to royal flags, and see how Hawaiian royal standards fit in with some other royal flags from around the world. Now, one of the things you might be thinking or wondering is, what is a standard? When do we use a term like this? Now, there's actually an academic study of flags. It's called vexillology. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but there are academic journals dedicated to studying flags. And usually a standard is a term that is applied for a flag for a monarch or for another royal individual or just an individual person. So this might be royalty, this might be nobility, but it might also be a president of a republic or another government official as well. Now today we're going to be looking at standards primarily in the context of royalty. But we can sometimes see the term standard used also for military flags. So you might have heard a standard, the term used when we're talking about military flags. So that's a little bit different. But the context of a personal flag is to contrast with a national flag. So earlier Ron was talking a little bit about the Hawaiian national flag, and now we're going to be looking at something more specific, the standards. One thing to always keep in mind about terminology is that it is not fixed. So the term standard is not always used, and in some countries, because of the royal connotation of standard, the term wouldn't be used at all. You might use the term presidential flag, or could be in the United States a Secretary of Defense's flag. But standard is a reference to an individual. Now I want to show you a few present-day examples and then kind of connect those to some of the Hawaiian royal standards that we'll be looking at in just a few moments. So if we take a look here at this flag, this is the British Royal Standard. It's probably the most famous royal standard in the world. And this design dates back to 1837. And it's actually about the same time that the first Hawaiian royal standard was created. Now, even though if you've seen the flags that are on display, this flag doesn't look anything like it, but there are actually some connections. So that's one of the things I'd like to do today, is to draw some of those connections between the flags that we can see on display today and an international context. Okay. Next we have the flag of the President of Russia. So yes, this is Vladimir Putin's flag. And you'll also notice that it looks very different from the Hawaiian flags that we saw in the exhibit, but there are also connections. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, about designs and similarities among all of these different royal or presidential standards. And then the last one here is the flag of the American president. So maybe you've seen this at a news conference, or maybe even on the president's car. If you've ever seen the videos of the Kennedy assassination, this flag was actually flying on the car. So even though all of these flags look very different from the Hawaiian royal standard, they are actually in some ways similar, and we will explore a little about that later. So where did this idea come from, the idea of having flags for individual people? We can go all the way back to the Middle Ages in Europe, when monarchs would fly banners and placed these images on their coats of arms. And today we'll see that the Hawaiian royal standard, for instance, includes a coat of arms, which is very common for standards. And actually, even in the American presidential flag, the emblem that you see in the center is the seal, which would be the equivalent of a coat of arms for a president. Now, hundreds of years ago, back in the Middle Ages, these royal flags were essentially national flags because monarchs embodied the nation, and there were no separate flags for countries. Monarchs had their flags, those flags would embody the nation. But in our modern age, when we have things like nationalism, royal standards became different from national flags. So royal standards would come to embody a person, a royal family, or another individual in contrast to a nation as a whole. So this is something that we see in the Kingdom of Hawaii. There was, of course, a national flag and a royal standard as well, and also personal standards that were used by different members of the royal family. So now we might think back in terms of a Hawaiian context. When was the first royal standard created? Now, if you know a little bit about the history of the Hawaiian flag, it was created very early in the kingdom's history during the time of Kamehameha I. And it wasn't too long after that that the first royal standard was created. It was the time of Kamehameha III. So before we look at the flag, I want to mention some challenges also, some of the issues that come up when we look at things like old flags. We're very fortunate today to be able to actually see some of the flags on display. But many of the physical specimens of Hawaiian standards from the 19th century and other flags from the 19th century, they just don't exist anymore because of time and age and such. We may only have written descriptions, and these can be very tricky when we look at things like color, for example. So the group that was working on this project, we had a big discussion about the colors that were used in some of these flags. Did they deteriorate over time? As you know, one of the ones on display was involved also in a fire that could discolor the cloth as well. So sometimes that means that not every single detail is going to be known. Also, it means that when we think back about written descriptions from the 19th century, people even at the time might have made mistakes too. So if you've read the newspaper recently, you probably know that mistakes are made all the time in the newspaper, especially specific descriptions or use of colors or even knowledge about what flags were used for, right? Because a person writing a newspaper article or doing a television program may not be familiar. So we always need to be very careful when looking at descriptions, and also even at old photographs as well. Of course, as you know, they weren't in color, so that gives us some challenges also. Okay, so let's get back to our story. The earliest written description that we have of the Hawaiian Royal Standard comes from the time of Kamehameha III. And Ron, if you read his article in the Hawaiian Airlines magazine article, he talked a little bit about it. It is a reference from April of 1837 to a banner that was hoisted on a ship which transported the remains of Princess Nahiena'ena to Maui. So this is the first example that we have, a written example of a Hawaiian royal standard. But as is often the case when we look at documents or stories from the 19th century, this article that gave this description doesn't give a description of the flag itself. So we don't have an existing illustration, so its relationship to subsequent royal standards and its origins and history are not entirely known. A few years later, in July of 1843, there is another mention made of a possible Hawaiian royal standard. And it's in conjunction with an event that I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is the event that took place at Thomas Square when the sovereignty of the kingdom was restored to Kamehameha III after the period of British occupation. A contemporary source from the time says that a royal standard was raised at Thomas Square. Now, a few things to be careful about: the use of that term. Sometimes the term standard was used to describe a flag or just a banner, and not necessarily a specific royal standard. So sometimes we see, even in contemporary accounts, interchangeability of words. But this flag that was hoisted at Thomas Square in July of 1843 is different from the Hawaiian national flag. The flag used at Thomas Square is described as a Hawaiian flag. So the arrangement of stripes before 1845 sometimes varied. Flags were handmade, of course. There's an 1845 law that gives a specific description of the order of the stripes, but before that, that sometimes varied. And on the flag was placed an image of a dove and an olive branch. Another source says this emblem was a crown and an olive branch. So here you can see it's kind of hard to reconcile these old descriptions, whether one of them is accurate and the other isn't, or did somebody see from one perspective and not another. So it might have had an image that looked something like that. So we don't know exactly what this flag looked like because there are no photographs of it and it doesn't exist anymore, but it's possible that it was an early Hawaiian royal standard. But in my opinion, I think it was probably just a banner, a special banner that was created for the Thomas Square ceremony, because it's quite different from the royal banners and royal standards that come later. So now we're going to see the official documentation that was used in 1845 for the first fully documented Hawaiian royal standard. And you can see that it looked quite different from the national flag with a dove emblem. So this flag was most likely designed by somebody in the British Royal Navy. So there is a letter from May of 1845 from the Hawaiian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Robert Wiley, who you may be familiar with, a letter written to Sir Thomas Thompson. He was the captain of a British ship that was docked in Honolulu at the time, and this is the first definitively known description of a royal standard of the Hawaiian Kingdom, dating back to 1845. It's the same time that the flag law is passed to give specific information about the national flag. And Foreign Minister Wiley writes in his letter, "Sir, I am commanded by the king," meaning Kamehameha III, "to make known to you His Majesty's thanks for the kind courtesy with which you have allowed one of your men to prepare his royal standard for the king, according to the national devices arranged at the Herald's office in London." Wiley further explains that the royal standard will, quote, "be hoisted for the very first time on the solemn occasion of the opening of the Legislative Assembly chambers on Tuesday next by His Majesty in person." So this is a full description. It's not too specific, so I'll give you a little bit more information on why we think it looked like this, based on some photographic evidence that comes from the Kalakaua dynasty and some other written evidence as well. So this flag that we see here, the royal standard that was created in 1845, was used from the time of Kamehameha III until the reign of Liliuokalani. All Hawaiian monarchs use this as the royal standard. So what can we see here in this image of the flag? We see the stripes, of course, from the Hawaiian national flag, and in the center on a white rectangle, we see a form of the Hawaiian Kingdom coat of arms. Now I'm going to show you a drawing which is probably from the 1840s. This is, as far as I know, if anyone has other information, this is always something, one of the great things about having this kind of an exhibition is that people have additional information, things that maybe are not yet known to the public. This is a drawing from the reign of Kamehameha III, probably from the 1840s, showing the king's yacht, which was called Kamehameha III, flying the royal standard. Okay, so if we look at the image on the top of the ship, it looks very similar to the image that I showed you previously. But there's one question or one concern, and that is the coat of arms. It's kind of hard to see what exactly is depicted there in the coat of arms. So from photos from the Kalakaua dynasty and from the flags that you saw on display, you see only one part of the coat of arms, a simplified version showing a shield and the crown on the top. But in heraldry, or the use of coat of arms, is a special term called an achievement. a heraldic achievement. And that's the full coat of arms. So you've probably seen that with the bearers on either side and the feather cape behind. That is the full, what was called the full achievement of the coat of arms. I have an image of it here. So it's a little bit different than what we saw on the flag. On the flags that you saw inside, you see the shield and the crown, but you don't see the other emblems from the coat of arms. So that's one question that's maybe still open from the time of the Kamehameha dynasty. Did the central emblem have the entire coat of arms or just the shield with the crown? We can't be sure because this drawing just is not clear enough to know. Also, one thing is you've also seen as you've been looking at the flags, they were all hand done. So every one of them would have looked a little bit different. So when you hear, well, did the crown look exactly like this or that? You can see that they differed, right? So somebody has made the crown in a way, maybe artistic license, which is perfectly fine, but every one of the flags is going to be a little bit different. My own personal guess is it was probably like what we see today, just because that's simpler to put on a flag. Can you imagine back in the middle of the 19th century trying to put all of those elements onto a flag? It would probably be pretty difficult. Okay, so we kind of have an idea of the first standard. We see this was used from Kamehameha III to the reign of Liliuokalani, but what was it used for? Foreign Minister Wiley also gave a description of what the royal standard was used for. So there were minutes from a Privy Council meeting in November of 1849, and Wiley gives a list of things that are times when the royal standard would be used. It was to fly at sea on all vessels on which a Hawaiian king, queen, or any of their children was present. So one thing that we can learn from that is the royal standard was used by the monarch, but also by other members of the royal family. So the Privy Council notes describe the queen and also any royal children that might have been present. Wiley also wrote that the royal standard is to be hosted from the royal yacht. As you can see, probably that image, in fact, is of the royal yacht, from sunrise to sunset when it is anchored at port. So one important use was of the royal standard at sea, on ships. In addition to use at sea, Wiley specifies that the royal standard is to be used when a king, queen, or any of their children is in attendance at certain public events. So that would be use on land. So we know from these descriptions that the royal standard represents the institution of the Hawaiian monarchy, not only the person of the sovereign, because it was used in certain circumstances when the sovereign may not have been present. We also know that by the time of the Kalakaua dynasty, the royal standard was also flown over Iolani Palace. So another land use of the royal standard. So we're very fortunate to have those, the Kalakaua standard, dynasty standards, on display for you folks to see today. Now here, this was the only color photograph that I could find, besides the flags that we see on display here, of a standard, Hawaiian royal standard in color. This is a photo from the Bishop Museum, probably taken in the 1950s. It's actually a postcard. So it was probably sold at the Bishop Museum. And you can see a Kalakaua era standard behind the thrones. These are actually the replicas, the 1930s era replicas of the thrones. And you can see the colors here. So that's one of the advantages of this, is that we can actually see the colors in the flag. So you'll notice that this is very similar to the ones that we saw or we see on display today in the exhibit. You'll also notice the coat of arms. Each one of them is a little bit different. So if you look very carefully at those flags on display, you'll notice the crowns are different. You'll notice even the placement of the quarters from the coat of arms are different too. So I've never seen any written documentation about that. I suspect that it was just the choice of the person making the flag, that they would have looked a little bit different. Again, we need to remember hand sewn, right? Not made in a factory someplace. Somebody would have had to put it together by hand. The royal standard from its inception was a very important symbol of the Hawaiian monarchy. In fact, it's mentioned twice in the Constitution of 1852, where the flag is talked about and is also referenced along with the national flag. So Article 40 of the 1852 Constitution declares that the royal standard and national flag were, quote, maintained as now established. So actually written into the Constitution. Article 46 of the Constitution noted that the Kuhina Nui, so a position that was sort of like a chief minister, was the keeper of the kingdom's great seal, along with the royal standard and the national flag. So it had great importance to be mentioned twice in the 1852 Constitution. Now, besides this royal standard that we see, the Hawaiian monarchy used some other flags as well, and that's what we're going to look at now. These date from the Kalakaua dynasty. So the only flag that we definitively know existed before the Kalakaua dynasty is what I will refer to as the striped standard. So the stripes from the national flag with a coat of arms in the center. So used from the time of Kamehameha III and by all subsequent monarchs. What about other royal flags? First, the monarch's personal standard. So this is what, for sake of convenience, we'll call the white standard. Although this is one thing, if you're in there and you're looking at the flags and taking a look at the color, is it actually white? And there are all these issues about age of the fabric, and as you know, one of the flags is involved in a fire as well. So this is an ongoing discussion, but we'll call it the white standard for now. So what we see here is the personal standard of Kalakaua. It shows the simplified version of the coat of arms on a white background. Okay, so here we see the stripes are not there, only the coat of arms. This white standard did not replace the royal standard. The striped standard was still in use during the Kalakaua dynasty. So if we look at this photo here from the 1880s, this is a photo of the king's boathouse, and the only photo where I could find the two flags together. So you can see Kalakaua's personal standard in the back, so the white background with a coat of arms, and then if you look to the side, you can see the striped standard. So we see the stripes and the coat of arms in the center as well. So what the photograph shows us is that the two flags existed at the same time. One did not replace the other. The white standard is introduced later, probably in 1880. There's a newspaper article from November of 1880 discussing what is reported as the first appearance of this flag for the king's birthday in 1880. And it reads, "The white standard of the Hawaiian sovereign was flung to the breeze from a lofty flagpole erected upon the central tower of the front facade of the new palace," so this is the new Iolani Palace, "on the 16th instant. This is the first time that that royal standard has been hoisted upon the new palace." So this is the, as we saw just a moment ago, the personal flag of Kalakaua. And this is also the flag that we have on display, the one that was used during the world tour. Just speculating, I think this flag might have been created for the world tour, because the world tour was going to be the first time the king would be shown on an international stage, and to have this personal flag might have been important as well. So it's created right around the time of the king's world tour. The white standard is also used in 1886 for the 50th Jubilee. So, oops, I'm going in the wrong direction. Here we can see Iolani Palace decorated in 1886 for the King's Jubilee, and we can see the white flag, the personal flag, draped in front of Iolani Palace. The flag was also flown over the palace for the King's Jubilee in 1886. In fact, there were 3 different flags that were flown over the palace for the Jubilee in 1886. The personal flag, or what we'll call the white standard, the royal standard, which is the striped standard, and also the Hawaiian national flag. So a description from 1886 says, from the several turrets, meaning of the palace, were exhibited His Majesty's private insignia, the royal standard, and the national ensign floating gaily in the breeze. All 3 flags. Another newspaper article says the royal standard, the national ensign, and His Majesty's private flag were displayed from the different turrets of the palace. And that was recreated for the first time in November of 2014. So every year you may see the palace decorated for the King's birthday, but in previous years, just the Hawaiian national flag flew from the turrets. But here we can see the correct flags flying as they did in 1886 and understand their meaning. So in the far left, we see the national flag. Unfortunately, it's not blowing in the wind. In the center, we see the King's personal standard, or the white standard. And on the far right-hand side, we see the royal standard as well. So this replicates what was shown in 1886 with the 3 different flags flying over the palace. Now, when Kalakaua died in 1891, the white standard was also used by Queen Liliuokalani as her personal standard. So let's take a look at this interesting photo. This is from 1929 for the dedication of the Aloha Oi Monument that is at Washington Place. And take a look at that flag there. That is the white standard. We see the coat of arms in the center, and we see the white background. In the newspaper, it was reported that the unveiling consisted of removing from the face of the memorial the Hawaiian flag, which had flown from the flagstaff of Iolani Palace at the time of the overthrow. So that is also, it's a little bit hard to know whether it was this design or this actual flag itself. Yes, I'm going to tell you who the people are in just a second. I knew everyone would ask about who those people are, so I do have that information for you. Another article says from the flagpole in the grounds of Washington Place floated a Hawaiian crown flag, such as was flown when Liliuokalani was sovereign, and over the tablet was draped another crown flag. So of course we know there were multiple copies of this flag. So to answer the question, who are the people? So from left to right, we have Maria Mitchell, representing the daughters and sons of Hawaiian warriors. A.P. Taylor, who is custodian of the Hawaii Territorial Archives. Lawrence Judd, governor of the Territory of Hawaii. And Mrs. A.P. Taylor, premier of the Daughters and Sons of Hawaiian Warriors. So this is I think this is a very unique photograph because it shows the flag actually being used in the 1920s. So it appears from this that the Queen used this white standard as her personal flag, just like her brother. And here we can see the Queen with the white standard. So this photograph is, if you've seen the new edition that has come out of the Hawaii Story by Hawaii's Queen, this photograph is in there. This is actually from the collection, I think, of the Queen's Hospital photograph collection. We can see Liliuokalani seated in front of the white standard. But as I mentioned, the stripe standard continued to be used as it was during Kalakaua's time. So we actually have some newspaper accounts from the Queen's reign that talk about the striped flag flying over the palace. We also know from the early 20th century that the striped royal standard was flown at Liliuokalani's Waikiki residence for her birthday, her 67th birthday, in 1905 as well. So both of the standards were used by the Queen. So to kind of sum up, During the Kalakaua dynasty, we have the stripe standard that comes from the time of Kamehameha III, continuing to be used by all subsequent monarchs. Then the new white personal standard, which was used both by Kalakaua and his sister. In addition to these two royal flags, there were three other royal flags from Kalakaua's time. There was a flag for his sister, Princess Likelike, a flag for Princess Likelike's daughter, Princess Ka'iolani, and a flag also for the king's wife, Queen Kapi'olani as well. Those three flags were all created in the same year, in 1885. So we'll take a look at those. This is the standard of Princess Likelike. Okay, so what can we see with this flag? We see it follows the same general pattern that we saw with the other royal standards. All right, so if we have the stripes, we have 8 stripes, just as in the stripe standard as well. But notice, of course, the stripes are all red, so it's a different coloring than is used in the national flag. Also, like the royal standard and the king's personal standard, we see the crowned shield from the coat of arms in the center. There is a surviving example of this flag in the Bishop Museum. However, it is not on display. But there are some photographs of it, and there's a very interesting photograph, I don't have it in this presentation here, of Kawaihaʻo Church for Princess Ka'iolani's funeral, showing what looks to be on one side of the altar this flag for her mother, and on the other side Princess Ka'iolani's flag as well, which we'll see in a few minutes. From the image that is in the Bishop Museum archives, the coat of arms looks quite different. Here I've put the standard coat of arms in the center, but again, every flag was done individually. To know exactly the reasoning and images sometimes in the central images is a little bit hard to know for certain. Princess Likelike's daughter, Princess Ka'iolani, also had a personal flag as well. This flag is also adopted in 1885, and it's also part of the same flag family. So we see crown shield in the center with a coat of arms. There is also a actual flag that exists today. It's also in the Bishop Museum, and like the other one, is not on display. Some of them are very large, as you saw on the display. There is a newspaper account of Princess Likelike's flag flying from a steamship and how large it was when it was on display. And both of these two, Princess Likelike and Princess Ka'iolani's flag, were designed by Robert Louis Stevenson's, I want to say stepsister. One of the Stevenson family actually designed these flags when she was here. So again, the coat of arms, it's not entirely clear from the photographs. It looks a little bit different from this. The meaning is not entirely clear. Also, you can see it's a little bit different because instead of having a striped background, it has a solid colored background. So what we can see with the 4 flags that I've mentioned is a flag family, right? So they're all kind of related in the sense they have similar imagery. They all have the coat of arms in the center, and they're surrounded by a striped or solid background. The last Hawaiian royal standard I want to mention is not part of the family of 4. And this is a very unique flag that was for Queen Kapi'olani. Adopted in 1885 also, it was the same year as Princess Likelike and Princess Ka'iolani's flag, but it looks quite different. Some challenges. No photograph yet. If anybody has a photograph, make sure you let us know. There is no existing photograph of this flag, so it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what it looked like. But there is some evidence, partly based on the 4 flags that we looked at, that it might not have exactly been a royal standard, but a special banner, because it looks quite different from the other flags that we took a look at. So let's look at the flag itself. This is sort of an artistic representation of what it looked like. The flag first appeared over Iolani Palace on 12th of February, 1885, which was the 2nd anniversary of Kalakaua and Queen Kapi'olani's coronation. A newspaper article describes it as, there was hoisted yesterday over the palace not only the royal standard of Hawaii, but a new and very beautiful flag in honor of Her Majesty the Queen. The flag is of silk and bears the name Kalaualani, the day of rain from heaven. Another newspaper article from the time gives a little bit more information about what the flag may have looked like. It says, this morning, precisely at 8 o'clock, a very interesting ceremony took place at the palace. A few minutes before the hour, a detachment of soldiers marched from the barracks with the royal standard and a new flag for Her Majesty Queen Kapi'olani. As the clock struck 8, they were hoisted up on top of the building, the drum corps playing from the barracks. The Queen's flag, which was hoisted for the first time, is a very handsome one. It is a white ground, in the center of which is a red circle with the inscription Kalaualani, the whole of which is surmounted by a crown. Okay, so this is an artistic representation of what it might have looked like. This is the only description of this flag that I'm aware of, and since we don't have photographs and we don't have any surviving examples, all the specific details are not known. Did the crown really look like this? We added some little Victorian touches to the circle. Yeah, exactly. So it's unclear whether it exactly looked like this, but it may have looked something similar to this. So the basic description is what was given in 1885. Now I want to do something to put these flags into a context. So how do Hawaiian royal flags fit in to royal and presidential standards from other countries, especially to look to Europe, because the idea of royal standards goes back to the Middle Ages in Europe. Now, in certain ways, the Hawaiian royal standards are following very similar patterns to what we see in Europe, but we also see some differences and unique features as well. So what are some of the similarities? Remember the three flags I showed you at the very beginning that didn't look anything like the Hawaiian royal standards, but are actually in some ways quite similar. The first thing is using the national coat of arms on the flag. So do you remember that, especially from our family of four, we have the coat of arms in the center of the flag. In fact, today, almost every European royal standard has a version of the coat of arms in the center. So it fits into a standard practice for royal standards. It's not always done in the same way, but the royal standard incorporates oftentimes a coat of arms. So when you look at that, it doesn't look like the Hawaiian royal standard, but this is actually the British coat of arms on a flag. So this is technically called a banner because it has taken the coat of arms and placed it directly on the flag. There's no other elements, there's no crown on the top, there's no background, but we can see that in a lot of ways it is actually very similar, because it has the coat of arms in the center there. The second area of comparison is to look at elements from the national flag. Also, with almost every European royal standard, although this one is an exception, you see elements of the national flag. So that could be, for instance, the use of the same colors that were used in the national flag. And we saw that with the Hawaiian striped standard, right? The same colors that are in the national flag. Another way where we can see elements from the national flag is in terms of design, right? Some of the same design elements are used in royal standards and national flags. So actually, if you remember that description that I gave back from 1845 about the registration of the flag, so to speak, in London, it talked about the national symbols being used in the flag. So the national flag for the stripes and the national coat of arms used in the center. So if we look here, so this is the Russian presidential flag. Design-wise, it's very, very similar to the Hawaiian flag. You can see the three stripes those elements come from the Russian national flag. So you might have seen a Russian flag. It's white, blue, and red. So the background is the same as the Russian national flag. And look what's in the center, the coat of arms, right? So we can see the design elements are actually very similar. So even though this flag is from 1994, it uses the same type of pattern that was actually used even in the Hawaiian Royal Standard from the 19th century. And let me just go, I have it here at the beginning. If we look at the US presidential flag, it's also the same, right? We see the coat of arms, or the shield of the president, which is a version of the Great Seal of the United States, on a color background, right? Just like we saw the kingdom coat of arms on a solid background, for instance, for the white standard, or for Princess Kai'ulani's standard as well. So does this mean the Hawaiian Royal Standard was based on European patterns? It's hard to know for sure because the written documentation doesn't specifically say that. But especially if the person who designed it was an officer of the British Royal Navy, he might have been thinking about the British Royal flag when he put the standard together. But we also saw from our talk about the different standards that the Hawaiian Royal Standards were unique, right? They used elements that were unique to the Hawaiian flag. So I hope we've been able to see today the international context of Hawaiian Royal Standards and also their development from the 19th century, from the reign of Kamehameha III to the reign of Liliuokalani as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.